Now, parliamentarians haven't had the best press over the last few years. There's an understatement, and the expenses scandal has been a big part of that. However, far from being a new phenomenon, it seems expenses were being used and abused over 700 years ago. Let's take a look at this. It's a parliamentary expense claim, a rather historical one, by one Fulk Payfarer, if that's how you pronounce his name, from 1309. At the time, knights were invited to Parliament to discuss matters with the King, and they were paid 4 shillings a day, including travel time, and that's twice the amount knights were paid to go to war. The details were unearthed by the Labour MP Chris Bryant whilst researching his book, Parliament, a Biography, and he joins me now. What was the motivation?
Well, I wanted to... It's Fulk Payfarer.
Thank you.
There's some great old names.
He won't sue me, will he?
No, I don't think so. Nor Morja Vavasour, who was one of the others. Or, for that matter, Walt Disney's great somebody or other.
They are great names.
William de Isnay. But quite a lot of them are de somewhere or other, because they're French names, quite interestingly. And... so basically, I wanted to abolish some of the myths that there are about Parliament. The biggest one is the thing that's trotted out so often, which is that Westminster is the mother of parliaments. The phrase...
Is it?
No, it's not. The phrase originally comes from John Bright, who was a Liberal MP in the 19th century, who was basically arguing that even England... who was the mother of parliaments, not Westminster, even England didn't give the full rights to vote to everybody. So it was a way of criticising, not of praising Britain. And that's one of the myths I wanted to get rid of. I wanted to get rid of the idea that we modern MPs are the most venal, the worst behaved and all the rest of it. I mean...
You mean there were worse behaved MPs? So tell us about some of the dodgy tales.
Oh, well, I suppose Ralph Crepin is one of the dodgiest. He was invited to the 1283 Parliament in Shrewsbury, which was basically convened to witness the hanging, drawing and quartering of the Welsh prince, who'd rebelled against his English overlords, quite right too. But Ralph Crepin was a burgess for London. When he went back to London, he fell out with a guy called Tuckett over a woman called Alice. When Tuckett tried to beat him up, he sent his friends round who murdered Tuckett and then dressed it up as suicide. But when this all came out, Crepin died in the Tower, Alice was burnt at the stake, and 14 of Crepin's friends, there's a lot of grisliness in this book, 14 of Crepin's friends were hanged.
Right, well, I mean, we showed there in the introduction a photo of one of the earliest expense claims, to bring it back to everyone's favourite subject, expenses from 1300. How did you track it down? It's
in the National Archives, and in fact, where I started from was, who were the very first commoners that we know came to Parliament, and that's your list. So Morja Vavasour was a teenager from Yorkshire. He'd come down, he was paid 4 shillings a day for travelling and so on. And it's the only reason that we know that they came is because they had their expenses paid. And incidentally, the point about 4 shillings rather than 2 shillings is that the King was really keen to have good people.
Does this interest you? Are you going to go out and buy the book?
This sounds fascinating. Look, I mean, we are lucky in this country to have a rich political history. You know, you often see American tourists being shown around Parliament, and you know, they can't believe that so much has happened within such a relatively small space. And I think Chris's book's very much going to be worth a read.
But we can be too overly proud, I think, sometimes, and we forget that so often chance has played such a role. So, for instance, we all think of habeas corpus as one of the fundamental British freedoms. It's been suspended plenty of times, incidentally, in the past, not only in Northern Ireland, but elsewhere in its history.
It's still a British export, isn't it, in that terms, or can
well, it's in Latin, of course, the word, but more importantly, when it came in 1679, in statute law, it was done in the last few minutes of the Parliament, and it only got through in the House of Lords because the teller for the ayes, as it were, or the contents in the House of Lords, counted one very fat peer for 10 votes. We should have lost. It should have lost. And we should... In 1713, we nearly had the same system as in America, where you take the executive out of the legislature. We only didn't because it fell at the very last minute. There was a tied vote, and tied votes in the House of Lords don't go forward.
Well, it's very impressive, the book.
This is only up to 1800. Volume 2's out in September. I don't know where you find the time.